Hi, good evening, and welcome to another webinar here at Azim Premji University. We're extremely excited to bring a panel of my colleagues here to talk about what it means to be doing an undergraduate degree in liberal studies, and also uh, how liberal studies enables an interdisciplinary approach. And I think I'm really excited to have this panel here today, and I'd love for my colleagues to introduce themselves. Could we start with Priya? Yes.
Hi, my name is Priya and I teach biology at Azim Premji University. Apart from teaching biology, I'm also involved in coordinating and teaching some of the courses in a minor we run here called the Biodiversity Conservation.
Thanks, Priya. Uh, Tarun, would you want to go next?
So I'm Tarun. I teach in the PPE major, which stands for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. I am a philosopher by training. I work on philosophy of science, but I'm also interested in political philosophy and teach that as well.
Uh, Thank you, Tarun. And Tony, would you want to go next?
Hi, my name is Tony. I teach the social science group here at Azim Premji University. I'm an economic sociologist, so I'm those sociologists who is interested in studying financial markets, agriculture markets, all kinds of markets. That's what I research on, and I do teach courses something related to these concepts of using sociology to study what are typically studied by economists. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tony. So before we go further, I'd also like to introduce myself. My name is Vinay. I'm part of the English group, and I'm here to help navigate this conversation about interdisciplinary studies. And I think it's a interesting one because I have a little anecdote to start off this conversation as well, because I have a mentee who's from the history department, and he has taken his minor is in conservation, and his occupational track is media studies. So he's taken these various combinations to also think of, possible different futures for himself, because he's unsure what the future would look like and what he'd be interested in the future. So I think this conversation would help a lot of other people think about this approach to how to look at the future, because things are evolving and at a rate that it's hard to predict where it's going on a daily basis. So to set that into motion and make a lot more sense, it would be great if we could also, if you could talk about your respective disciplines and talk about how it arrived at a place where we needed to talk about it as an individual in a specific discipline, and how there was later a need for talking about interdisciplinarity. So who would want to go first? I'll open this up as a volunteer. Please pick. If
So
there
I
are
can,
no,
I can,
Tarun, my
yeah.
favorite volunteer.
I think the major in which I currently teach, philosophy, politics, and economics, is by design and construction as kind of interdisciplinary major. So the idea really is to apply the perspective of a number of different disciplines towards problems that all of those disciplines have something to say about. It has been, so there's this kind of a challenging aspect to it, there's a kind of rewarding aspect to it, right? So one of the challenges teaching in this major, and the way our particular program works, is that students take classes in disciplines from the social sciences, from economics, and from philosophy, plus some classes that are designed to integrate the three disciplines together. And I'm in fact currently teaching one of the classes that is meant to integrate the three disciplines together, which means that in my own head, I have to be able to integrate these disciplines together. And I think as someone who thinks about education, who's interested in academics, who's interested in ideas, I think it's trying to think beyond these disciplinary silos, trying to think about what a genuinely liberal education means, a kind of breadth of mind, being able to connect ideas that across, particular ways of thinking and talking. That is the skill that I think we want to inculcate in our students with our major. That I think when people go through a traditional education, they might become very comfortable talking in a particular language with a particular vocabulary, but it's a language and vocabulary that is maybe only addressed to people within a certain circle, a certain disciplinary circle. And I think one thing that teaching, thinking across disciplines does is it forces you to think about how you express ideas in a way that extends beyond the particular vocabulary or jargon of your discipline or the particular assumptions of your discipline. It gets you to question the assumptions that any particular disciplinary approach may bring with it. And it also gets you to think about how you express thoughts and ideas to a broader audience, all of which I think has been very valuable for both me and hopefully my students.
Right. So I can sort of add on to that. So as a program,
Sorry,
our
thanks, Tarun. That was a really nice way of setting context to this conversation. Tony, would you want to follow up on that and talk a little bit about your
yeah,
discipline?
yes. So, as a program, the social science program at Azim Premji University is designed to be interdisciplinary. Now, when I say that, if you think about conventional degrees, I mean, these are in sociology, in political science. So we don't go by that kind of an approach. What we do is to pick each theme for each paper. Each course is related to each theme. So we have a course on agrarian India. We have a course on religion, and what we do then in each of these courses is to bring perspectives from various disciplines. So if you're doing a course on agrarian India, you get a bit of economics of agriculture, you get a bit on sociological works on agriculture, you do get a bit of political science or political economy related work on agriculture. That's the kind of approach we have in our course, and what that gives the student is kind of a 360 sort of a view on all these concepts, all these themes that we have dealt with, right? And we also understand that one kind of language, whatever discipline people use, is not no more, able to take up the challenges of modern day world. And therefore, even in our research approach, we inculcate some kind of a mixed method approach to our students. So they do research in using quantitative tools, and they also use a lot of qualitative tools. So we, in that sense, take interdisciplinarity both in the thematic level, but also in the research. And I think as a faculty here, it forces me to be more and more interdisciplinary, right? In the sense that I do have students who have done a course on indigeneity and belonging in India, wanting to do with me some political economy of tribal issues. So it kind of asks me also to be interdisciplinary in the sense that I cannot be limited by looking at only what I thought as a disciplinary vantage point. I'm always challenged by my students to, come out of my own comfort zones even more, and have their the other perspectives also adding up to my own lectures and my own lecture plans, and that's fun. That's a lot of fun, and I hope my students do have fun in doing that.
Thanks, Tony. I think your students and we are both enjoying how you're talking about what you do in class, and I'm really looking forward to us building on this conversation further. Priya, would you want to take forward from here?
Yeah, so I come from biology, and I think, like most disciplines, a relatively recent discipline, and I think a lot of initial learnings in biology have come from natural philosophers, right? So people who went out and looked at the world and kind of built our understanding of how the natural world is constructed. And I think with advancement in more instruments and things like that, we've gotten better at peering inside ourselves. So biology actually then spans really these scales that are very wide. You can study a particular cell, you can study a specific molecule inside a cell, and you can study an entire ecosystem. And I think in at every scale, whatever we study, biology does intersect with the society at large, right? So whether we're thinking about public health, we're thinking about diseases, whether we're thinking about conservation, wildlife, animals, plants. I think at every scale, because biology interacts so much with the society and it influences society and society influences it, I think there is this definite thought about keeping that at the back of our minds when we talk about biology, when we teach biology. Apart from that, also in our curriculum, we encourage students to kind of explore the ethics of doing, studying biology, right? Whether it be who's asking the questions, whose bodies are being used to answer those questions. Things like that we do encourage in our program. So, in some ways, although science is often considered like the silo, this thing that stands by itself, we're trying to break that and trying to get students to kind of look at the fact that there is a context within which the science is learned and practiced, and that context is very much the real world, right? And everything that influences the politics and the sociology of the real world will also influence the politics and the and of how we do science and how we practice it. So that's something that I think is very interesting about the way in which biology is also explored within the university.
Thanks, Priya. I think you started off the next question for me here as well with what you said, and therefore I'll also ask you if you could, if you don't mind, starting on how you think are the sciences and arts so different, because there's also this need of segregating the sciences, right? While we also call ourselves the School of Arts and Sciences, there is a separation that still is implied. And do you want to talk about that in the disciplinary level, and then maybe we can dig further?
Yeah, I think the separation was fortunately it's well in this society level. I think every institution kind of then builds it into the way these programs are structured. But honestly speaking, can you hear me?
Yeah, there's something. Your mic, I think, is a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, is this better? Okay. So I think the differentiation between science and arts essentially is something that is already there in many at an institutional level across institutions, right? In India, we envision them as two separate things. But honestly speaking, I think the sciences and the arts and the humanities, or whatever you call them, they can learn from each other, right? And it comes back to the fact that the sciences have to acknowledge that it is the real world that influences how we do science. And therefore, engaging with the real world also means engaging with other ways of perceiving the real world, examining the real world, right? And I think, I mean, one trivial example I can give you is just thinking about a tree, right? You can think of a tree in the form of a poem. You will describe it. You can think of a tree in the form of a social space where people come together, gather, and have conversations. You can think of the tree as a space for political, gathering. At the same time, a tree is a biological entity. So I think by looking at these various lenses, we can also examine biological entities, I suppose. Apart from that, I also feel like just thinking of phenomena itself, because scientists love to study phenomena, natural phenomena. I think to understand that even these natural phenomena, at least in biology, are influenced by human actions and by our own history and the way in which we interact with landscapes, right? I'm an ecologist, so a lot of my examples come from there. But if you think about a landscape that has, for example, seen conflict, right? That conflict between, say, two parties of human beings does have an enormous influence on that landscape itself, right? The residue of gunpowder might affect the soil. The fact that people had to whack way through the forest will affect the future regeneration of the forest. So I think that way, definitely other disciplines have a very important role to play in our understanding of natural phenomena. So yeah.
Thank you, Priya. I think you started a lot of questions, and I think I'm really excited to dig them further. And, it made me think of this short story I'd read in PUC, that is the equivalent of 11th and 12th in Karnataka, about a village coming together to replace their tree in the middle of their village with a glass tree because they thought they needed to celebrate the village, and how they chopped down the tree and replaced it with a glass tree that a somebody built, put together there. But it was a tree that did not give shade. It burnt everything. It's a tree that did not house plants anymore. And I can see how the potential of reading this story is even a one encouraging people to protect their environment, to think further of why these trees were seen as sacred by a village community. This potential can be explored further, not just in a science classroom, but also in a BA English classroom, right? So that potential is amazing. And I think we should also do our efforts to communicate to our audience who joined here today. And Tarun, on that note, would you want to take this conversation a little further?
Yeah, so in some sense, this idea of the relationship between science and the arts is something uh, that is very important to me, because I started out studying physics. I did my undergraduate degree in physics, but while I was studying physics, I also started taking classes in philosophy. And what I found was that many of the same motivations, the same interests, the same questions that I found so fascinating in physics were also being talked about by philosophers, but in a very different way. And I think studying both simultaneously gave me an appreciation for how, there is a possibility of thinking about these two approaches as not being fundamentally opposed, that you can either think of the world in a way, in a scientific way, or think of the world in a kind of philosophical way, or in line with the humanities, or something like this. They're both providing kind of aspects on a kind of single reality, right? And ultimately what we want to do is find some way of integrating, combining those aspects to get a richer sense of that reality. And so subsequently, a lot of my work has focused on integrating the humanities, philosophy, and physics. Particular topic that I have been interested in a lot throughout my career is the question of time. And again, so if you just take an idea like time, right? I think if you look across disciplines, you'll find there's something to say about the notion of time, right? Physics talks about the physical structure of time and space. In philosophy, people have often thought about, our existence in time, what that means for us. History obviously deals with various scales of time and how to think about it. In biology, we talk about rhythms and clocks that organisms have. We talk about the idea of evolutionary time. And you could go on and on. I think with every discipline, you could find something to say about the central aspect of our experience. And I think being able to understand that ultimately there are these central aspects, central features of our existence that are being approached or understood by these different disciplines in different ways. But there's something about being able to integrate those understandings, to come to this kind of more rounded appreciation that's extremely valuable. And I think a lot of the programs in our university attempt to at least provide that kind of understanding to some extent.
Thanks, Tarun. I think it was really attention drawing at how you were able to talk about time in a factor that is affecting all our disciplines, and then also making this connection with the sciences and arts. And I think I'm really looking forward to how Tony is going to build further on this. Tony, over to you.
Sure. So there are half a dozen kinds of research areas one can think where the social science meets sciences, right? For example, just to highlight a couple of them, there is a burgeoning sort of strand in social science of the science and technological studies. We call it STS. This is to look at labs as a social space. So how do scientists understand the world they are studying? And that has a lot to do with their social experiences. The kind of power play that happens within the lab, etc., etc. There's a lot of work interesting on that. What is even more exciting for me at a personal level are questions of collective action and how social science have learned a lot from biology in understanding, how do different beings, different animals come together, and do we have to something to learn from that in our own understanding of how humans come together in collective action questions. I believe the emergence of complexity science and how it is interacting with social science is fabulous to see, right? So a lot of people are now seeing a lot more similarity between how humans interact in social world with that of how different kinds of beings interact in the natural world. And That's and there is also an interesting aspect, and this is something that I think Tarun would find very interesting, in the sense that there is a lot of science, social science studies on the question of objectivity that we find. So while there could be some of the core of sciences and social sciences might differ, it's very interesting how many of the questions, many of the issues that the social science are now tackling are being done in a way that through learnings from science. So computational social science, something I kind of do a little bit in life. We take a lot of our learnings from computational sciences. So this idea that you have one way of thinking in science, another way of thinking in social science, another way of thinking in humanities, I think we are starting to see the end of it. Really speaking about it, right? You got to see how you have a problem to study, you have a problem to tackle, and I think the world is realizing now that the best way to do that is to pick important learnings from multiple disciplines, bring that together, and you might have one discipline that slightly drives your vantage point, but then of course get many other perspectives on board, and then try and tackle that. And I think this conversation between science and social science has been very productive on that front. Pretty in the recent times specifically, extremely productive on that front.
Thank you, Tony. And I think, what I want to ask next is something we've already begun emerging at, and that is the question of how does this interdisciplinarity train you for working in your own discipline, but also how does it train you as a individual going out into the world, shaping you? And if we could use concrete examples, right? The example I started off with, this history student who's doing OT in media studies and looking at conservation. His idea was he'd be able to do environmental journalism. He would have research skills from history. He would have a training to look at things, with how it's being recorded, understanding various inputs that's coming from. And media trains him in approaching and writing and producing content, right? And conservation familiarizes him with the field. So these are very strategic ways of approaching, I thought. And if you have more examples, more concrete ways of thinking this through, that would be great. Tony, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, so I do do this thing called academic advising the students, and I get to interact with a lot of students, regarding their minor choices, their occupational minor choices, and we have kind of very interesting combinations here. So, for example, I have students who are majoring in social science. They do a minor in English and also do a media kind of an occupational minor, and their idea is that I do want to write about social issues in future, or I do want to be in the business of making documentaries and informed feature films, and I get my learnings from social science about social issues. Then I kind of take that. I do get some kind of literature introduction, and then I also get my media skills. There are interesting combinations that students have picked up with. For example, I do have students with social science major and information science minor, also having some kind of an OT in education, or OM in education. And their idea is that, I want to think about society, but I don't want to just do the classic ethnography sort of field. I want to perhaps use computers to understand society. So some of my students, they express interest in what is called as natural language processing these days, and they say that let me use some computer codes to break down what humans are speaking about. Can I find some clues about the social life if I use a computer to understand it? So let me learn a lot of coding and do that, right? So I do have students with social science major and information science minor. I do have some of my students with social science major, and conservation, OM, or environmental science minor, and people are coming up with very interesting learnings in the way they the learnings from social science, and they couple that with some of the learnings they get from their lab courses in some of these minor programs, right? I think the only combination I'm yet to see is social science with physics. I think soon I will get to see that as well. I mean, I look forward to that day. My students are daring and very, they're curious minds, and I think I will get that soon.
Thanks, Tony. I think we're looking forward to all the interesting things our students are doing with this option of, being a science student, but also somebody with access to liberal studies. On that note, Tarun, do you want to give us some examples?
Yeah. So maybe I can talk about a kind of concrete example or possibility. I mean, so we currently, in terms of our students, many of our students are just beginning to think about how to expand into other areas, think about their disciplinary minor, their occupational minor, and so on. Because our first batch of students has just entered its second year. But I think what they're realizing and what we're realizing in conversation with them is that really you can think of virtually any combination of courses as highlighting a particular way of understanding the world, a particular kind of set of career opportunities. One example might be that someone who majors in philosophy, politics, and economics, already there's a kind of combination of disciplines there. And the idea is that the social science background and the economics background kind of complement each other. Often economists tend to describe certain social systems in terms of abstract models. Social scientists do that too, but social scientists also often do much more detailed ethnographic research of particular social circumstances. Those can inform each other. Philosophy contributes to that by maybe providing some sense of a vision for transformation, for how things could be in the future. But then to think of that in combination with the minor possibilities, which in our program is both a disciplinary minor, a minor in another kind of academic discipline, plus an occupational minor, is so one example might be, among many that we could think of, is that let's say that you are taking PPE because you're interested in a career in environmental policy, right? Working for an organization that thinks about or helps research or teach environmental policy. You might take the PPE major, which trains you, I think, in many ways to think about social reality, policy making, how these connect together, both at the more abstract level and the concrete level. You might combine that with a disciplinary minor in the environmental sciences, which gives you maybe some of the background in terms of the scientific understanding you need of how the environment works, plus some of the policy background as well, which is involved in the environmental studies minor. And then you might take your occupational minor in biodiversity and conservation, or something along those lines, right? Where you again get an understanding of what it means to work in the field on these issues of biodiversity. And so that combination, I think, would set you up extremely effectively to work in this field. And that's just one example among many that you could think of combining a major, a disciplinary minor, and an occupational minor.
Thanks, Tarun. I think we've done such an interesting attempt at offering them combinations and ways of seeing. It's really exciting to see these concrete examples and possibilities emerge right now. I'm hoping this makes more people enthusiastic of what they could do here at the university. Priya, on that note, we're coming back to you. We've mentioned biodiversity a few times. Maybe you could tell us a little more about biology, maybe instead. But please feel free however you want to answer.
So the biodiversity conservation occupational minor is just, I mean, we don't have students who've graduated from that batch, right, from the 4-year program. So I'll use an example from a previous batch where a student did a major in economics and did a minor in biology. Yeah, and today that student, after finishing her 3-year program, went on to do a master's in wildlife biology and now is pursuing a PhD in trying to understand how tropical forests recover from disturbance or something. So I think that's a fantastic example of how a student has leveraged her understanding of both economics and of, say, some amount of biology and her interest in nature to forge for herself a path where now she can contribute to biodiversity conservation, keeping in mind the demands of what economies are, right? So there's this false dichotomy that's always set up between conservation and development. And I feel like this is a person who kind of understands both sides of that, I guess, argument. So for me, I feel like that way, biology lends itself to lots of cross-disciplinary thinking. Just to pick up what Tony had said previously, we have a student who was a major in biology, then went on to do a couple of courses on gender and other social science courses, and now is actually doing something on trying to understand urban spaces, both from the lens of gender, but also from the lens of nature, right? So I think these different combinations that we have of occupational minors, disciplinary minors, and disciplinary majors really allow students to combine their interests and learn requisite skills and a certain amount of knowledge in each of these spaces that they can then combine to make these very interdisciplinary careers for themselves that allow them to work in very exciting spaces, right? So yeah, biology really is that way, is able to, I think, allow students to move between several different disciplines. That's
Thank you, Priya. I think these are really interesting examples of what our students are out there doing with, access to what education is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to make them think and engage with the subject that interests them and motivates them. And since we've been talking about the merits of interdisciplinary studies, should we also maybe address if there are concerns in sticking to a disciplinary approach? Are there limitations to just sticking to approaching a subject with your disciplinary lens? Is it a other concerns and drawbacks that we need to address? So if we could start with Tarun on this, and then we'll move around.
Yeah, so I think maybe one concern that I've noticed is that every discipline, at least, operates with certain assumptions about, basic idea about how the world is structured, basic ideas about how we respond to problems, how we try to understand the world, and those assumptions might make a lot of sense for the particular kinds of problems that the discipline tends to be focused on. But I think it's always valuable to be able to sometimes step back and think about the fact that, look, this is not the only way of understanding the world. And I think it can sometimes when you get too locked into a discipline, it can sometimes become, you can get these blinders on where you don't see the viability or possibility of other approaches. You don't see the value, maybe the limitations of your particular approach. So I think one advantage of getting an exposure to different disciplinary perspectives is just seeing the difference in the way questions are asked and answered, and realizing that, okay, maybe my assumption that this is the way things should be done is not this universal truth. It's maybe this is the way things are done in this particular discipline, or this is the way we think about human life or society or the environment in this particular discipline. But there are other disciplines in which we think about things differently, right? So, I mean, economics might think about what it means to be a person participating in society in a particular way. Sociology might have different models, different understandings. Literature might expose you to different understanding of what it means to have a kind of relationship with people around you, right? So, and I think having some degree of access to all of these approaches at least helps you break out of the idea that what it means to understand the world. There's always this kind of openness, this kind of possibility of different approaches that you haven't considered, and opening your eyes to that, I think, is an extremely valuable aspect of interdisciplinarity.
Thanks, Tarun. I think now that we've started addressing these limitations in the discipline, it'd be more interesting to hear what the others are saying and what other disciplines see this as. And Tony, over to you if you would want to build on this a little further.
Well, I believe Tarun has dealt it, at the core of it, and I think one of the things that when I talk to students and is that it's a problem of bit of an identity. Some people feel that they have an identity crisis when they do some interdisciplinary. I feel it too kind of overwhelming. The biology is telling me something. My occupational minor is telling me something, and my major is telling me something. And I think it takes a little bit of time for students to understand that these are not contradictory perspectives, but these are rather complementary perspectives. And because we are in this university offering that kind of a complementary perspective, it takes a little time for that to sink in to the students. And I think by the end of third year, now we have students who are in year 3, they really like sort of enjoy this complementarity of perspectives. That's when they really come and tell us that, what we did not realize perhaps in our first semester is that these are not competing disciplines, in that sense. These are actually disciplines which are complementing each other, right? And they are able to see the limitations of each of these perspectives, and come up with creative and innovative ways of thinking, about the questions they are interested in.
Thanks, Tony. Priya, do you want to take this last bit, and then we will talk about a few other interesting ways of looking at the discipline?
Yeah, I think Tony and Tarun have kind of covered most of the challenges that comes with interdisciplinary learning. I just want to reiterate that each of these domains has its own domain-specific knowledge, right? So you have to be very willing to bridge those gaps. You have to be willing to kind of look at these other domains and learn from them. And like I think what Tony pointed out, it can feel like they're very different, right? But there are commonalities. Because ultimately we are all looking at the same world. Yeah. Acknowledging that the perspectives can be different, but that they're all looking at the same world, I think really helps in kind of bridging those differences that are there in those perspectives. It is a lot of hard work. I think that's something that we have to acknowledge. It takes a little bit of hard work and time to kind of connect across disciplines, but the depth of understanding that you then get about a phenomena or about looking at the world from these different perspectives, I think that really makes up for all the hard work, because you really see the world in very, I think, diverse ways. So yeah, I would add that and stop there.
Thanks, Priya. I think, this is making me go back to a couple of things that was repeated often at school for me, when they would say Albert Einstein used to love listening to music, or that he was interested in listening to poetry, or that Kannada poet laureate Kuvempu was interested in metaphysics, right? This distinction and separation between the two fields is sometimes seen as, oh, look at this person who's trained only in one is able to appreciate another, or vice versa. And it does make it, like we've been reiterating for the last few minutes, build silos, actively separate them and put as separate spaces. So I want to ask you all the question that we're trying very hard to answer in our classrooms, and remind students that, do students have to put more effort just because they're studying science? Is it more viable? Is it easier to get a job out in the world? And do art students have it easier in the classroom? Are their degrees just easier to get because there's less work involved? I'm putting air quotes out because that's what the popular perception on campus is, right? That humanities and art students don't have a lot to do. They just need to read something and show up in class, and that's all they have to do. So let's talk about this a little bit. And I think Tony is very, very moved and passionate by this, but I'll not start with Tony on this question. I'd like to ask Tarun this question first, and then I'll come around.
I mean, look, I think ultimately what I would say to a student who's asking me which kind of class is easier is that a class is going to be easy in the sense that it's going to feel like you are not kind of burnt out by the class if you are interested in and passionate about what is happening in that particular class, right? So to think about there being some property of the material itself about it being easy or difficult, as opposed to it being an aspect of your relationship to the material, and also thinking in the category of easy or difficult, right? This idea that I can get an A because it's easy, rather than I can get an A because this is something that deeply interests me and I actually want to think about it, work on it. I have a perspective on it that I think is going to be valuable. I think that is maybe a more productive way of thinking. I think it's hard to generalize, but I have noticed a pattern that if a student is taking a class purely because they think it's going to be easy and they don't have any kind of intrinsic inherent interest in the subject and aren't able to develop that interest, then the subject is going to be difficult for them. I mean, just sitting in class and listening to something you're not that interested in is difficult, right? So I think there's this idea where maybe difficulty is associated with, I don't know, doing mathematics or something, and then ease is associated with like reading a novel or something like that, right? But reading a novel that you find uninteresting or uninspiring is an extremely difficult task. Or working on a mathematical problem that you're really passionate about and interested in doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like you're enjoying yourself, right? So I think really that should be the central question: is do you have an interest or a passion in this, rather than is it easy or difficult? And I think the question of whether sciences are more difficult than the humanities or whether they're equally difficult, I think it's just an ill-posed question, right? I think those categories, ease and difficulty, in thinking about the content of a subject, aren't really the correct categories to be thinking about.
Thank you, Tarun. I think that started off this conversation in a really interesting way, and I think Tony's passions have reached a limit that makes it exciting enough to share with us now. I'm looking forward to what Tony has to say on this.
Thank you, Vinay. No, I was smiling because I just wish I had one of my students with me to respond to this idea that social sciences are very easy to do. I just wish I had a student to respond to that. No, but we all grow up with these artificial hierarchies in our head. That some disciplines comes on top, and then some disciplines follow them, and then there are some disciplines follow the last, and it is placed in an order of apparent difficulty, right? And I think not only that the idea is fallacy, there is a lot of fallacy in that idea. I think one reason why that idea is strong, and other than what Tarun said, that if you are trying to read a novel in which you have no interest, it might sound way more difficult than some high order differential calculus if you are interested in calculus, right? Now, of course, for sure, that's definitely the case. And I think added to that is this idea that given the interdisciplinarity kind of approach we have here at the university, I don't think no discipline is sticking in its silos and speaking one kind of a language. So if you do a social science program with this, we have advanced statistical courses in which we just teach statistics. There is nothing other than that. We do have courses which use advanced political economy, and where we draw on a lot of literature from economics. Then of course we do have courses, a course called Religion Under Social Science Lens, in which I believe make students to read very hard texts on religion. I cannot associate anything easy to that kind of a setup, right? Where you have to from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock you have to do some advanced statistics, and from 12 to 2 you have to read some social science dense text on religion. I don't think there is anything easy about that. I'm sure my students would not agree if I say that it's an easy thing to do. That's important. And I think these hierarchies in the real world have really collapsed. And I do think that people are now realizing that these kind of simple versus not so simple versus difficult kind of hierarchy between disciplines have really been smashed and collapsed. It is just the relics of these thoughts still exist, and I think with the change in the educational patterns that we are seeing in our country these days, I don't think those hierarchies doesn't have much of a lifetime. I mean, I think they are going to leave the stage soon. We do recognize that each discipline, with its own perspective, coupled with other perspectives from other disciplines, are not going to make anything easy or difficult anymore from now.
Sorry, Tony, you gave us a lot to think about. I think it's exciting how we are thinking about interdisciplinary studies and how to look forward to and how to approach academics itself. And Priya, on that note, would you want to tell us a little bit more?
Just two things. I think Tarun and Tony have covered a lot, and I agree with the fact that if you're interested, anything will seem easier to you. One thing that I want to highlight is that there is a huge amount of history and domain specific knowledge in any discipline. So learning any discipline requires you to actually engage with all that knowledge, right? So it is going to be hard. I don't think it's any easier to do an English course than it is to do a biology course. The second thing, I want to back that up with my own personal experience. I once was trying to sit in and do a few lectures of an anthropology course. My God, it was the toughest thing, just a few lectures, okay? And it was really tough. And the toughness is not because I am stupid or, I don't have the ability to understand information. It's just that because I don't have that history of knowledge, right? So I'm approaching it laterally. So I think no subject is any easier or harder than any other subject. It depends on how you're engaging with the depth to which you want to engage with it, and where in that history of that knowledge are you actually trying to learn it at, right? So I think, I'd like to end with that to say that everything's hard or everything's easy. I don't know. Depends. Nice.
Thank you, Priya. I think it's going to be a very exciting conversation, but we've reached the 45-minute mark. So I want us to take a minute here and I'll open this up for us to think a little bit differently in responding what it means to be interdisciplinary in your own respective disciplines that each of you are coming from, and what it means to be interdisciplinary at the Azim Premji University when you're an undergraduate student. But before I get you all to answer this question, I have a little bit of an anecdote I'd want to share with everybody. I'm constantly drawn back to this friend at the university where I was doing my master's in Hyderabad, who was doing her PhD in neurosciences, and she was working on insects. And because it was very stressful and a lot was going on, she would take classes in Japanese and Korean to have something else simultaneously engaging other parts of her brain, right? They weren't directly in any ways related to her work, but it was something that would keep her intellectually stimulated and not bored. And often interdisciplinary can even offer that, right? Sometimes you might be able to just engage yourself intellectually and come back to your own work refreshed and think about education and learning as exciting and fun. And I think that's why we're all here in the university, right? Because we find joy in learning and we're not limited by a discipline. And that's what interdisciplinary studies does, that we're not pushing ourselves in little tiny boxes with bows that tell us you are not meant to stray from a path. We want you to stray from a path, find other things, and look at the world for all of its beauty, I guess. And on that note, would Tarun want to answer what it means, what interdisciplinary studies means, and what it means at the university?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some sense it's a little bit of a vague term, and I think it can mean a number of things. So one aspect of interdisciplinarity, certainly, which, like I said, we have to think about a lot because we are teaching an ostensibly interdisciplinary major in PPE, is specifically integrating disciplines or insights from disciplines to shed more light on a particular issue or a particular problem. So just to take one example, I'm currently teaching the introductory course for this program, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. One of the topics we cover in that course is the idea of cooperation, right? What it means to cooperate. And we are, of course, approaching it with these three disciplines in mind. So we talk a lot about economic accounts of cooperation and models that people have made economically. We look at particular social accounts of solidarity movements that talk a lot about cooperation. We look at philosophical work or political philosophical work that sees political communities as examples or refutations of the idea of the possibility of cooperation. And I'm sure you could go further. I mean, again, biology would have a lot to contribute to an understanding of cooperation. Literature would have a lot to contribute to the understanding of solidarity, cooperation, and so on. So that's one kind of interdisciplinarity, where the idea is, okay, I'm interested in this problem, the problem of cooperation, and realizing that, look, ultimately intellectual interest, academic interest arises from an interest in a problem. It shouldn't arise from an interest in a method, right? It's not that I'm interested in this particular way of answering problems. It's I'm interested in this problem. And hopefully what it means to be a broad, well-rounded intellectual is to be able to say, okay, if I'm interested in a problem, I should be able to identify ways that of addressing or thinking about that problem that aren't just constrained by the fact that this is the only way of thinking about the world that I've been introduced to. Just knowing that there are other ways out there. You don't have to be completely educated in all of them, but just having some idea that, look, there are theories of cooperation out there in biology, theories of altruism among organisms and how that functions or why that evolved. There's theories of cooperation in philosophy and all of this. So that's one idea of interdisciplinarity. This idea that ultimately the reason we have disciplines is not because there's some natural carving of the world and that things have to be divided. There's a historical reason why particular ways of thinking about the world, particular ways of talking about the world ended up being divided into disciplines in the university context. But the way the world is that, like Priya has said, it's just one world. You have problems and you have ways of thinking about problems, and interdisciplinarity can mean thinking about problems rather than thinking about ways of answering problems. But another aspect of interdisciplinarity is maybe not so much, okay, trying to bring multiple disciplines to bear on a single problem, but as a way of enhancing yourself as a person, as a citizen, right? I mean, that is part of the goal of a university education, is some kind of project of self-realization. And a project of self-realization, I think, is more valuable the broader it is, right? And so maybe some of the examples you gave. So somebody who majors in, let's say, physics, does a disciplinary minor in social science, does an occupational minor in music education, let's say, like they're emerging from this education with maybe things that to most people would seem like, well, why would you combine these things? Well, you combine these things because what it means to be a human being isn't just to be a human being in one of the ways that is sanctioned by our universities or our culture. It's to define for yourself what your interests are. And interdisciplinarity can also mean realizing that your interests span across disciplines and you want to understand the world from a certain variety of perspectives, and so focusing on those perspectives. Yeah, so those are at least two ways of being interdisciplinary, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Tarun. I think as we started coming close to the last 10 minutes, actually 9 minutes at this point, and there are some questions pouring in, I'd like to ask Priya and Tony to keep their answers shorter. And there's just one question after this that maybe we don't have to spend too much time on, and then start addressing the questions coming in. So Priya, over to you, and then Tony.
I really don't have much to add. I think interdisciplinarity for me is essentially, like I described earlier, biology is about looking at life, studying life, right? And life is glorious in so many ways. And it is, I don't think any one method can capture the complexity of life. And so for me, being able to study what life is from various perspectives, right? Because ultimately it's also knowledge is about my perception. I'm building it. So it also includes how I perceive it through other senses. So I think that way, as a biologist, I can't stress more why interdisciplinarity becomes very important for engaging with what life is, right? So yeah, I guess that's what I would think of interdisciplinarity for me.
Thank you, Priya. Tony?
Yeah, just to quickly, so I think Tarun really covered what interdisciplinarity means, right? We are here to solve problems. We are not here to study one discipline because a discipline exists, right? I think the value of interdisciplinarity, and just to highlight that aspect, is to say that, you see, if you ask people who are leading, organizations, or who are, bureaucrats, etc., they will tell you that they are looking for people with multifaceted skills and multiple perspectives, right? You could be hired as an economist, or you could be hired as whatever specialization person, but you are not hired only for that reason. Like, whichever organization you would like to work with, of course, is going to ask you more perspective than one that you primarily come with. And I think that's really where interdisciplinarity like kinds of leads the discussion these days, right? You can no more be saying that I'm a sociologist, I only talk the language of sociology. You are supposed to work in groups with multiple people, and larger perspective, wider perspectives you have, you are better placed to do that. And I think that's the kind of skills that modern day organizations are demanding from individuals. And this has been my experience in the past, that you don't go to a room by saying that, I have one perspective and my perspective is the one that matters. You try doing that, your team will kick you out. I think that's one aspect of interdisciplinarity that is often overlooked, that you are naturally being made a team player. You are made into a group individual, rather than being an individual who only speaks a particular language and can understand only a particular language and is kind of insular to other languages. So that's no more the case. You can understand only a particular.
Thank you, Tony. I think the next question I have, and is one of the questions I see from left in the comments by somebody called Meda, a student, who's saying, how does a student who hasn't experienced interdisciplinary learning in senior secondary school cope with interdisciplinarity in college? And I think as you address this, if you could also bring in from your respective experiences of only one example of, or any thought that any observation you've made of a student who's been able to take something from the campus life that we've curated and for students that we're building in our curriculum as well, help them make that has helped students make interdisciplinary learning easier or in a way more accessible, engaging for them. So to answer that question, do I have volunteers or
No, I can take
okay,
up that.
Priya, thank you.
Can I take it? Yeah.
I think, Tony is lagging.
Sorry, I thought Priya was answering that question.
Yeah, no problem. I can. I think the way. So I am part of the biodiversity conservation occupational minor, and that means that we have students who are coming in from different disciplines to take that minor, right? And so in a way, the curriculum is designed to be interdisciplinary. We have, for example, one economic student who's coming in, and I think the curriculum is designed keeping in mind the fact that there are going to be students who are coming from different disciplines. So there's enough within our curriculum space given to building those foundations, giving them enough of a foundation so that they can then tackle that interdisciplinary learning that they're doing. So to give an example, I have an economics student in the biodiversity conservation occupational minor. The minor is a series of 5 courses, right? So we have students coming in from economics, we have English literature students coming in, we have students who are doing philosophy, all of them trying to do biodiversity conservation. So in the first course, for example, what we do is to build the necessary skills that everybody needs, right? A little bit of biology, a little bit of ecology, a little bit of trying to understand communities, human communities, a little bit of political ecology. We bring all these different disciplinary learnings that they need, and we introduce them, we give them that baseline, and then we take them through the remainder of the courses in the minor so that we build on that learning. And I think that's how we facilitate interdisciplinary learning in the university. It's not that students are going to be, we don't expect students to come in knowing how to deal with interdisciplinarity. So I hope that answers that question from Medha. Yes.
Thank you, Priya. Do Tony or Tarun have anything to add on this specifically? Then I would like either of you to go first. Tony?
Nothing. I think the broad contours is what Priya said, is that we, all of our syllabuses, right? I mean, in social science, for example, we have these courses on statistics, and I always say that we not just hold the students, we actually hold their fingers and put it on the keyboard while they start learning R, So that's the level at which we start on all of this. So we understand that many students who are coming to us to study social science may not have had a prior exposure to using computers for quantitative techniques. In our social science minor, our first course is called Seeing Like a Social Scientist. Again, the idea is that let's tell the students how can you start seeing the world like a social scientist. We don't assume any kind of prerequisite in doing that, right? And that kind of runs through all the programs I see in the university, all minors or disciplinary minors or all occupational minors. We don't assume that the students are starting out at a certain level. We assume that the students are curious, they're interested, and we can help them to start that interdisciplinary journey by starting at a very, very very, very introductory way, but also in a very fascinating and that in a manner in which that answer the student curiosity. So
Thank you, Tony. Tarun, do you have anything to add on this topic?
I'll just say something very quick, and that is that I mean, so yeah, I agree with Tony and Priya that in our education we don't assume that the student is already coming with this understanding. So part of it is just our job to kind of. It's not so much your job to cope with interdisciplinary learning. Hopefully, if we are doing things correctly and you are an interested student, we will be helping you transition into that form of learning. But another thing I want to say is that in some sense, interdisciplinary learning is not a fundamentally different kind of learning, right? I mean, the word interdisciplinary might make it seem like you're doing something strange and alien that you haven't done before, but really, it's learning something new, but and maybe learning something new that doesn't fit neatly into one of those disciplinary pockets. But anyway, when you're coming into the university, you should be coming in expecting to be learning something new. That's a challenge that all students have to face. Also, adapting to a new way of learning, right? In some sense, there's an expectation for you to be much more of an engaged learner than maybe your school expected you to. And so, beyond those expectations of learning something new, being engaged in what you're learning, I don't think you need to think of interdisciplinary learning as something fundamentally different or more scary than any other form of learning. In some sense, it's arbitrary what we call disciplinary, what we call interdisciplinary. It just happens that some kinds of methods are isolated to their disciplines, others stretch across them. But there's no real fundamental difference beyond that.
Thank you, Tarun. I think you've all done a really good job in helping students understand what it means to be doing an interdisciplinary undergrad, or one that looks at interdisciplinarity in a far more serious and concrete attempt. And I just want to add at this point that even at the school level, when you're studying sciences, social sciences, math, history, civics, geography, they're just studied as individual subjects. What's happening here when you come to college is that we've gotten these little small avenues that help you see that these two disciplines of sorts are meeting at an interesting point that hasn't been attempted at school. You have an introduction to all of these disciplines. We're just trying to gently nudge you to an approach that opens up two disciplines that you thought were very separate. And I think that have been done wonderfully by all my colleagues in the respective classrooms, right? I hear that from my mentees often as well. And even if you look at the assignments, they're so open to, bringing other disciplinary approaches when you're trying to answer questions. And another anecdote, even though we're out of time, I have a mentee who's a physics major. His minor is in math, but he's not doing his occupational track is biodiversity, and he's not doing a minor because he wants to just go attend a bunch of different courses, because he took Understanding India 1, where his mind was blown with how social sciences is looking at the world. He knows he wants to pursue physics and math, and it's a very clear thing. And he likes conservation, which is where Priya is his instructor, and he really enjoys his classes. But here, humanities and social sciences, he gets to go to these classes where the world is being looked at so differently. It's intellectually very stimulating in a very different way. And I think we're not just trying to say that interdisciplinarity is just about research in a particular direction, but it's also an opportunity to learn from different ways and different ways of thinking. And on that note, I think I'd also go to the last question, which is very interesting. How is the job market for liberal studies? Because apparently the students only heard about policy research and policy analysts. And I think at this point, it's also a very interesting time to be entering the job market. It's not that there are no jobs for people with a humanities degree. There are just jobs that are missing in many senses. So instead of thinking of jobs specifically, would you want to answer what are things our students have managed to do with their respective degrees that might not have directly meant the jobs they've gotten? One example would be the many English students who ended up working at museums and bookshops and not necessarily going and teaching language, or ended up at a PR firm or an advertising firm. Some of them are school teachers as well. Some of them are getting their B.Eds or doing masters. So Tarun, do you have some examples? And then I'll ask Tony and Priya.
Yeah. So like I said, we haven't yet graduated a class from PPE, but based on other disciplines that I've taught in philosophy, for example, I think one maybe one aspect of liberal studies that maybe is misunderstood or not fully understood is that unlike maybe certain uh, courses or certain kinds of universities that are very vocation focused. The idea here is to provide you with a broad set of transferable skills. And that is part of what interdisciplinarity is about, is that you're getting skills when you're learning, whether it's biology, social science, philosophy, English, whatever, you're getting skills that you can use across a broad range of career options. So in some sense, the idea here is to equip you with the kinds of abilities and skills that are, I think, valued across a number of domains. Skills of critical thinking, argument, expressing yourself well, researching carefully, analyzing the world carefully, being able to perform quantitative data analysis. You find these across many different courses, even though they're technically liberal arts courses or liberal studies courses. So yes, I don't think that you need to limit it to policy research and policy analysts. We have among the students we've graduated, students who are working in schools in the education field, students who've joined various kinds of research centers and so on that might fall along the policy research lines. We have students who are working in financial establishments. We have students who are working in even things like sales, or people who've gone into journalism, gone into law. So, and this is all from philosophy, right? So the idea is not to think of your choice of discipline as limiting or determining a particular career pathway, but thinking of it from the perspective of, okay, what skills they're providing me that I'll be able to apply across a range of career pathways.
Thank you, Tarun. Priya, do you have any responses? And if you could keep it short, and then we'll pass it off to Tony.
Yeah, I'll just give an example of a student who did her major in biology. Before we had the occupational minor, we had something called the interdisciplinary studies. She did sports and fitness, and now she works in an organization that actually uses sports to build communities among marginalized people, right? So I think that's a perfect example of how she has kind of allowed her interdisciplinary curriculum to kind of allow her to do a job that really she enjoys and brings the best of both understanding biology and understanding her interest in sports, for example. Yeah.
Thank you, Priya. And Tony?
So quickly, so we are yet to graduate our students, but I can just tell you from what my students are interested in, they're kind of pursuing as of now. So a set of students really would like to work in social sector organizations, and they've found what Tarun underscored, the transferable skills to do that, right? So you could be interested in working in an organization that works for a particular community, and you find what is lacking in that area, and you work for that. But more importantly, a few of my students are interested in doing what is called as market research. So at the end of the day, you want to sell things to humans, you have to understand humans, and students see that their social science training helps them to become market researchers, and there is a demand for people with liberal studies sort of education in these firms, in these companies. There are students who are interested in becoming bureaucrats, and they do have a kind of a friend circles, or sort of a peer group who are interested in that. They're coming up with interesting ways to study to beat these exams. A lot of my students are interested in going to become teachers. Some of them researchers, not of the policy kind necessarily, but other kinds of researchers. Many of my students are interested in. Some of them would like to branch out into law because they believe that they figured out they could do a bit of something related to legal thing. Some of my students are thinking of pursuing careers in media, a little bit, a few of them. So I do have a range of students, and I do keep having these conversations with students. Now they're in their third year or fifth semester. I do keep having conversations about their future career plans, and I get a range of them. And some of them even wants to pursue something like an MBA, and it's great. So What this liberal studies education have given them is the confidence to transfer their skills into a career in which they think they will do good. And I think that's something that gives a lot of joy to us, that we are not telling the students that A, B, or C should be your career. In fact, we are telling the student that you go and pick your career. Let's see what kind of transferable skills we can offer you.
Thank you, everybody. I think you've all done an excellent job in trying to introduce what it means to do what it means to do liberal studies and undergraduate degree at Azim Premji University. And I think students will be excited to be in your classrooms when they're here. And thank you, all of you, for being so kind and generous with your time and answering all of these questions. And at this point, I'd also want to just quickly address one question that had come in that we haven't answered is, do we prepare our students for the UPSC exam? We do not. That is an external exam you'll have to prepare for on your own, but there are skills that may be transferable, as we've been saying. And on that note of transferable skills, UI, UX, user interface, and user experience research is a new field. The college training for it is extremely recent, but people have been doing this research for a while. These are researchers who've looked at a new topic and tried to analyze and have been able to do it for the last few years. That's how a lot of apps have been developed. It's just having research skills and being able to apply it. And that's what we do here, right? We teach you a set of skills using a specific domain as the way of entering the field, right? It's what you do with those skills. And I really hope all of you are able to see that from what we've told you. And at this point, I'd like to thank all of you and invite Pratiti, who has some remarks to make before we close, and some announcements. Pratiti, please join us.
Thank you so much for that wonderful session. I just wanted to quickly add, if any of you had specific questions on the application process, you can join our virtual help desk that happens every Thursday from 4 to 5. The information to join that session is available on the applicant portal. We have a campus day happening at Bangalore campus on the 15th of November. That'll be a really nice opportunity for you to meet some of our faculty in person. So do join us for that as well. Thank you again, faculty, and we'll see you next month when we have a similar conversation. Bye.